Good evening and welcome to the Cinema of Ideas, the Independent Cinema Office's virtual screen, a forum for conversations about cinema and film culture. My name is Catherine and I'm the director of the ICO. Just in case some of you don't know about the work that we do here, we are the UK's national body in support of independent cinemas of all forms. Our activities include programming, training and events, and you can find out more about us at www.independentcinemaoffice.org.uk. A special welcome to audiences from our partner cinemas across the UK and audiences from our ICO networks. Thank you to our funder for this project, the BFI, awarding funds from the National Lottery. For this evening's event, I would also like to thank Vertigo Films and in particular Michael Wales and Holly Gregory for all their support and assistance. A few housekeeping things to mention before we start this evening. This event is being live captioned. Thank you so much to Sam, who's our captioner this evening. It's also being recorded and will be available to view on our YouTube channel in due course. You can find an archive of other Cinema of Ideas previous talks there too. Thank you also to my colleague Sammy, who's doing the tech tonight. The discussion will last about 40 to 45 minutes with time left at the end for comments and questions. Do get involved in the conversation and do please feel free to post comments in the chat. And Sammy will pass them on to me and we can share them with Terence and Brian when we have the questions at the end. We'll aim to finish promptly at 7:30. I just want to say a few words about our next event on the platform, which will be taking place in June. It's called Feast from the East, a season of films celebrating the food, feasts and famously fertile soil of Eastern Europe, and curated by Katerina Pavluk, who is from our Emerging Curators programme. It includes both seminal films from the region, such as Sergei Parajanov's The Colour of Pomegranates and Alexander Dovchenko's Earth, and the unduly little-known formal masterpiece, Bread, by Mykola Chipoksky. Alongside the cinematic spread, we'll be hosting a panel conversation with Alicia Timoshkina, as well as a cooking masterclass with chef Olio Hercules. The event is free, but we kindly ask for donations to select Ukrainian causes. If you are interested, please sign up to our mailing list on the TCOI website. I think Sammy is going to post a link in the chat now for you. So on to this evening's event. To mark the release of his latest film, The Glorious Benediction, we are absolutely delighted to welcome the director Terence Davies, one of Britain's foremost film poets, a visionary filmmaker and responsible for some of the most iconic British films of the last 5 decades, including Distant Voices, Still Lives, The House of Mirth, Of Time in the City and Sunset Song, amongst others. We are currently streaming Terence's landmark trilogy films made at the beginning of his career on the TCOI platform until June the 2nd. Tonight he is being interviewed by our friend and BFI Flare programmer Brian Robinson. So hello Terence, hello Brian, please do turn your cameras on. We've been looking forward to this conversation so much, that's just me, but everybody else as well. We would like to wish you both a very warm welcome to the Cinema of Ideas. I will come back at the end of your conversation with questions that we'll have posted from our listeners this evening. But until then, over to you, Brian.
Okay. Good evening. Hello, Terence, and hello, audience around the world. We're here. We will talk a lot about the film Benediction, but we're going to go back to your early life. You were born in Liverpool and grew up there and didn't really become a professional filmmaker until relatively late in life, but you were still very young. But can we talk about the time in Liverpool, what it was like growing up there? Now, your first film, the Terence Davies trilogy, is very much anchored in Liverpool. It's almost like a character there. But can you give us a flavour of who Terence Davies was as a young man?
Well, I was the youngest of 10, 7 surviving. And like everybody, I left school at 15 at an ordinary secondary school and went into an shipping office for a year and then into an accountant's office. I was hopefully going to become an accountant. But whilst in my teenage years, I was still very, very, very devout. And the fact that, homosexuality was a criminal offence, that really did taint my teenage years. But as I was working in this accountancy office, I wanted to act and write. I don't know why, but I just did. Because I'd gone to the movies at like you go to church almost. It became almost a religion. I went all the time. And if I couldn't find anyone to go with, I'd go on my own. But I soon realized that I couldn't have stayed in an office all my life. I just couldn't have done. So I started getting into local amateur dramatic societies to start acting, and they were usually light comedies, because that was what was very popular with amateur dramatic society. And on Tuesdays, I went down to the Liverpool Writers Club, where I wrote all that kind of awful juvenilia that one goes through. We got very, very encouraged by that. It came to a point when I was 27, when I was going across the Mersey to my job one morning. I always used to buy The Stage, which came out on a Thursday then, I think. And I'd already applied several times to get into drama school, and I'd always failed. And I thought, well, I'll have one last go. And it was a drama school in Coventry. I got in, and I got my local funding, because those days you got a grant for 2 years. Whilst I was there in my first year, I don't know where it came from, but I wrote Children, which was the first part of the trilogy, and sent it off all over everywhere, even to people like Milton Subotsky. Would you believe? Unbelievable. And everyone turned it down or didn't reply. And I used to be able to go home once every 3 weeks, because my grant, I could afford to go home once every 3 weeks. And I was desperately homesick. I get terribly homesick. And this particular Friday, I went home. I got into the house. My mum made me a cup of tea, as she usually did, and I switched on the telly. And it was about the BFI production board. So off I sent my script. And 6 months later, I got a call to go down to see them at their tiny office in Lower Marsh behind Waterloo Station, and met the wonderful, heroic Mamoun Hassan, who said, "You have £8,500, not a penny more, you will direct." I said, "Well, I've never directed before, so now's your chance." And apart from the cameraman, the crew hated the film, and they told me every single day for 3 weeks, it was a baptism by fire, I can tell you. And then obviously I had to go back and complete my second year at drama school, because those days, if you didn't complete your course, you had to repay the whole of the grant, and I couldn't afford to. And I went back, but I'd done some editing with the first editor, who wasn't very good. And I thought, that's it, it's over. Clearly, I have absolutely no talent at all. And Mamoun had left by this time, and Peter Sainsbury had taken over. And he said, "Will you come down and see me?" So I said, yes. He said, "Would you be prepared to go into the cutting room?" I said, "But you're wasting money. You've already wasted £8,500, which in 1973 was a lot of money." He said, "I do think there's a good film in there. Would you go in?" I said, "Yes, I will, but you're wasting your money." So that you are. Anyway, he found me this wonderful woman called Sarah Ellis. And the first day in the cut room, she said, "Which is the bit you dislike most of all?" I said, "Well, it's the end. I'd seen it as, a close-up of the boy dissolving out and pulling out, dissolving back. But and it's been cut rather than dissolved." And those days you had to send it to the laboratory, because it took 2 days to do dissolves. And she said, "Well, I don't think you're right." She said, "But I'll do it." So she sent it off, and 2 days later, we ran it through the steam deck, and she said, "You were right." Oh, I can't tell you, I wanted to kiss her. It was so wonderful that I'd done it purely on instinct, and my instinct in that instance had proved right.
But you'd been, as you say, almost addicted to the cinema, so you were kind of learning about storytelling, perhaps without even being aware of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's a way of watching films where you just kind of let it wash over you, and you are bathing in the cinema. And it's kind of, it's not real, but you feel somehow it is just taking place in front of you.
Yes.
And when you, in the cinema, when people are surprised, they often give a small intake of breath. And I think when I first saw your trilogy in the 80s, there were a number of moments that I felt were so powerful that even 40 years later, I can still remember the emotional impact of them. And I think it's true of a lot of your films that you can press emotional buttons, and that, could you talk a little bit about the emotional content of maybe some scenes, if you can remember anything from the trilogy, because people will have the chance to see the film if they haven't already.
Well, it's really listening to your inner voice. I mean, content dictates form, and never the other way around. But I mean, in parts of Madonna and Child and Death and Transfiguration, I actually filmed in offices I'd worked in, which was very strange. And some people I really got on well with were really frosty. Really frosty. And I remember saying to one of the actors, I got on well with them. Why are they so frosty? He said, well, you got out. And I said, yeah, but I made the effort. There were certain things that when I wrote them, and then particularly the sequence inside the confessional in Madonna trying to see male buttocks. I was the only one who was actually embarrassed. I thought, oh, God, why did I write it? But it needed to be in. And where the trilogy was going, it was literally on instinct, how I felt. Because what had been a revelation to me was, although I thought that first crew made me feel that I had no talent at all, what I didn't realize was when you look down the camera, it's what is left out that's equally important. That was a revelation. And framing things, which I said, I can't tell you why I want them framed like that, but I just do. They just feel right like that. And I can't go around with a viewfinder because I want to look down the lens, which caused a lot of to do. But I grew up in a large working class, and it was quite an emotional film. And we spoke our minds, and so there was rows and things, but wonderful parties as well. It was very, very modest. But when I was growing up, the big features were very emotional. All That Heaven Allows, Magnificent Obsession, and they were all women. They were amazing. They were about women. And so I grew up with that, and I grew up with my sisters and my sisters' friends. Much as I love my brothers, I grew up with my sisters, and I love that their world that they created. So it was a mixture of what I felt instinctively. I didn't know whether it was right or wrong, but the atmosphere in which I grew up. And my brother, for instance, my eldest brother, was a docker, and he'd come in and he'd say, Thelma Ritter's in it, you've got to see it. A docker noticing there's Thelma Ritter, that's actually not bad. And a bloody good actress she was too. And we were rich in the great American musicals were made then, at the period I was growing up. And also the great British comedies were the best then. Because those days when you went to the cinema, it was first house, second house, and you had a supporting feature. And the only time the British film was feature was when it was a comedy, because they were better than the Americans. But that was the only time.
So someone said that Benediction was the first gay film that you had made, which is obviously completely wrong, that they haven't seen the trilogy and indeed other of your works. And I was very struck seeing it again very recently, that how much of the story is about the trauma of coming out and living with desires, sometimes acting on desires. Can you tell us when you first had an inkling of your own desires and knew that there were other gay people out there?
Well, when I left primary school, it went up to secondary school, which was run by men and was very cruel. I was bullied for 4 years there. And we had to go to swimming baths on Mondays. And I remember getting into the shower and seeing this young man there. And I remember instinctively, I shouldn't be looking at him. I knew it instinctively. I didn't know why, but I knew it was wrong. And having to be in these cubicles to get changed was agony. It was utter agony. So I knew there was something wrong, but I didn't know what it was. And on a Sunday, people bought the News of the World, and they bought this other thing called the Empire News. And I remember opening it, not that I read anything, I just looked at it. I was 12, 13, and there was a double page spread over which there was a bowl of fruit, and it said, "Queers, they're everywhere." And instinctively, I knew I was one of them. I didn't know how, but I did. And then the next time was during one summer when I was about 14, and it was school holidays. They were building a wall at the back of my house for a garage called Smitten's, would you believe? And this young man only had his jeans on, and he was a bricklayer. And then I really knew something was wrong. I thought, I shouldn't be feeling like this towards another man. That's when I knew. And the biggest revelation was when I left school at 15, I went into a shipping office, and the lad there who was 18, and I thought terribly sophisticated, and he went to the movies and noticed the photography. I thought, God, isn't that fabulously soigné? And we started to go to the cinema after a day's work. He said, "Oh, let's go to the Odeon today." He said, "I want to see the latest Dirk Bogarde." So I'd only really known Dirk Bogarde in the Doctor films, which I have to say I didn't find very funny. And we went to see it, and it was, of course, Victim. And when the policeman says, "You realize that he was a homosexual," you could have heard a pin drop, because you never use that word. And then I knew then, and then Bob, who was that dad with me, said to me, well, I'm queer too. And I said, well, I am. That's how I found out.
Well, it takes some people a long time to find anyone, and there's people who come out very, very late in life. But looking at the trilogy, I was really struck at your explicit, in a very subtle way, that the story is about the trauma of existing for three different men who are all the same character at different stages, which I think the construction of the film is really fascinating, if we take it as three, about how you get into the character immediately. The first moment when they say, "Who's a fruit then?" And the traumas and the kind of beating themselves up for being Catholic, and the wonderful juxtaposition of music and meaning that you do so exquisitely. I was really struck and wondered, how easy was it to get Doris Day? It all depends on you.
Well, it wasn't so much that it was easy, but Nita Amy was still working for the BFI. This, like Mamoon, one of the great people who are heroes of the BFI production board. And I said, I know it's going to be expensive, Nita. Could you actually get clearance for me? And she said, all right. She was a very succinct lady, but very wonderful. We've got it. It cost £3,000, which was an awful lot of money. But it was doubly wonderful because that was the piece of music I knew and wanted. But I loved Doris Day, still do.
Well, when she sings, "I can be happy, I can be sad," it is like a signature for the Terence Davies brand.
Well, it is me. I mean, the reason I think why parts of the trilogy are raw is because I was still going through them. You know, at 27, it was because my teenage years were just misery. You know, I'm thinking that. What am I going to do with the rest of my life? Is this going to happen for the rest of my life? I'm being stuck in an office for the rest of my life. Those two things terrified me. They really frightened me, and still do.
I mean, looking at the offices now, they're like museum pieces, because where are the computers? How do they work? And what struck me watching it was that it's almost 50 years ago, roughly. If you were shooting in 1973, that's almost 50 years ago. And yet the difference from 14 to 1964, which is almost the time period that you cover in Benediction, it's the same time period. And there's
Yes.
something very weird about our relationship to time that I know that you're interested in. And I think when you're younger, you don't understand what older people are thinking because you've no reason to really understand. There's something about looking back. And would you say that in your life that you've had a vividness of memory, that there are things that are as real to you now as they were 50, 60 years ago? That
Yes. Yes, extremely intense. I've got a very intense memory, but it's not. It really is like for quartets, that moment, burning in the moment, and that's all. No before, no after, just the burning in the moment. I'm very good at remembering emotional atmosphere as well, and I remember small things. I think that's one of the things that I love about Chekhov. He reveals to you in small things. In fact, it was Bob who took me to my first Chekhov in Liverpool. It was a Saturday afternoon performance of The Seagull, and I didn't understand it, but I fell in love with it. So it's about the intensity of feeling, and I do feel very intensely, either for or against. But the memories have been sort of burnt in me. I mean, I can remember with certain films where I saw it, the route I took, and where I sat. It's that vivid, particularly for things like Seven Brides for Seven Brothers. I can remember where I saw it in April, and there was an April shower. I can still remember it coming out, and it was sunny, and then it rained, and then going in to see Seven Brides for Seven Brothers.
Could we just talk a little bit about directing of actors in the trilogy? Because there's a lot of them, but in particular, Wilfrid Bramble, who gives an absolutely terrific, and for me, when I first saw it, a terrifying performance, because, I mean, there are many different themes about, you've just got an unflinching look at the bleakness and pleasures of life in both. And I think it's an incredibly rich thing, but I was fascinated by how it was to work with a celebrity, which Wilfrid Bramble was. Younger viewers may not realize that he'd starred in a BBC comedy drama called Steptoe and Son. What was it like working with him?
Well, what happened was I'd seen him on some quiz show. I don't know what it was, but he was, and they were doing some sort of scene from a Dickens, and he was in it. And I just thought, I think he could pull it off. Anyway, I got in touch with him. I said, I can only pay you £10 a day, and this is the role. And he said, yes, I'll do it. And the very, very first thing we shot was the death when dying, which is a long track in and around. And I said to everyone, look, this is very, very difficult for him. He's got to do that chain sticks breathing, which is terrifying. And in between the takes, we don't speak. We just keep everything silent, go back to the head of the track, and then start again. So we did the first take. In fact, it's the first take that we use in the film. And as we were putting the camera back on the track, his voice said, the Duchess of Bude in Lahore said, darling, this is such a bore. I'm covered in sweat. You haven't come yet. And look, it's 3:45. And between takes, they got filthier and filthier. And the only other one I could remember was there was a young lady called Alice who pissed in the Vatican Palace. It was not dire need which provoked this fell deed, but sheer Presbyterian malice.
My goodness.
And one more thing. When I said we've got it now, but he said, when I first came to London, I lived in a house which is a flat let by the landlady. He said, and above me, 2 women shared a flat. He said, and I was coming out of the house one day, and the landlady said, come in, come in. So he went into her room. She looked out of the window, and the 2 women came out and into the street and walked away. And she said, you see those 2? And he said, yes. She said, they're Elizabethans.
So we should really just set the trilogy to one side for now and move on to Benediction, which is at a different path in your career. It's fresh, it's new, but it's quite a departure for you in that it's, I mean, you have done historical recreations before and dealt with a poet, obviously, in The Quiet Passion, dealing with Emily Dickinson. But how did you come to Siegfried Sassoon and this big project? Because it's a fascinating range of characters that you bring in, and it's a kind of revelation of a certain type of gay society that I think most people who learn about Wilfred Owen in school have known nothing about.
Well, 7 years ago, I was in Toronto, and Ben Roberts said, "Would I be interested?" So I said yes, because I didn't really know his poetry that well, and so I said yes. I didn't realise what a huge life it was. I mean, these 3 vast volumes of his life, and he went everywhere. He knew everybody, and that really was daunting. What do I dramatise? Because you can't dramatise the entire life. I mean, it'd be 20 hours long. So I had to go through and think, what do I respond to? Obviously the poetry, then the fact that he was gay, then that odd thing of in the 20s and 30s, gay men getting married. But the thing that really hooked me, I think, was that he'd converted into Catholicism, because I was brought up a Catholic, and I eventually abandoned the faith because I thought it was a lie. But I fought very hard against my doubts from 15 to 22. I really did fight hard. And I couldn't believe that someone would actually want to become a Catholic. And so I looked at the ritual of becoming Catholic, which is incredibly pagan and unbelievable, and it goes on for days. It goes on for days, for God's sake. But also at the end of it, what I drew, I think, from it by writing it is what is the underlying unification of that? And I think he was trying to find redemption and salvation, and he didn't. And I have to say, I've looked for it and I haven't found it either. And
the title is Benediction, which has various meanings, one of which is a blessing or a prayer, or it has a specific meaning in ritual. Is there a meaning that you ascribe to the word benediction?
No, only its literal meaning, in a sense that it's a calling down for divine favor, and of course he doesn't get it. I would argue because there isn't one there. That illustrates the major subtext of he's looking for some kind of salvation, some kind of redemption, and constantly is disappointed. I mean, you can't find it in other people. You can't find it in religion or art. I mean, and then you've got to come to terms with the fact that, you were one of the 3 great poets of the First World War, and because you survived, were kind of semi-eclipsed. And that must be hard, because he was a great poet, but I really do think that he thought that Wilfred Owen was the greater poet.
And it's a film which is full of really wonderful performances, and it's beautifully written too. But because it's so important who plays what character, I'm fascinated to know who came first, not the chicken or the egg, but was there a particular actor that you built the whole production around? Not
really. I could not work like that. You have to have a certain extent. You've got to have someone that might bring money in. That's just the practicalities of it. You've got to do it. No, but I'd seen quite a lot of people for Siegfried. And what a lot of actors do now, and I think it's really wonderful, they do self-tapes. So they can do it as many times as they like, send you the ones they like. You can watch it as many times as you like, and they don't have to come into a room with 3 people they don't know. And I think that's a great idea. Anyway, I met Jack, we had some drinks together with Lucy Rand, who did the casting for me. And so really, quite frankly, as soon as I met him, I knew it was him. I can't tell you how, I just knew it was him. And he did a self-tape for me, and that merely confirmed it. But other people I approached, and I thought, oh, will they take it? I mean, the lovely Sam and Russell, lovely Peter Capaldi, lovely Anton Lesser, lovely Gemma Jones. They're all small roles, and they all took them. I mean, that was so lovely, because I didn't think I thought they might say no. You know, and finding other people is the same thing. You go through that long process of either seeing them in person or in self-tapes, and then you decide. But I have to say, Lucy Rand, who did the casting for me, did a brilliant job, and it's just a fabulous job. I mean, she just is so good at the job she's in. Thank God she is, because she was terrific.
And it's a period drama, but it doesn't have any of the hackneyed tea towel fabulousness of some of the 1980s lush romantic dramas that we saw. It's sometimes very uncomfortable, a film to watch, that it's got raw emotions. Not everyone is happy all the time. Can you talk about the emotional impact that you were seeing? Because it is an unflinching gaze, the gaze of Terence Davies, I think.
Well, you can't sugar the pill. And when I was brought up, both as a Catholic and in my family, the thing that was prized above all else was honesty. Sometimes it caused ructions, but you were taught to be honest, even with yourself. And if you were in the wrong, you admitted it, And when I left school, Mr. Bushell was the headmaster, and he gave everybody a written reference, because you had to have a written reference those days. And I've got it somewhere in my archive, and I'm still very proud of it. He said, "This boy is scrupulously honest." And I've always tried to be. It's sometimes very uncomfortable to be honest, and sometimes it's best to be kind than to be honest. I've learned that too. But you can't sugar the pill. What you can do is say, a lot is said by things that are not, like the texture of things. Actors moving around within a texture, within a scene, the mise en scène. You can tell a lot simply by what is behind them. And that, I know where that influence comes from. It comes from It Always Rains on Sunday, when Googie Withers goes to the door to open the door to one of the policemen, and that flock wallpaper, which is these huge flowers on, which is suffocating, but it's perfect for that house. It's just perfect. So I'm interested in the texture behind the actors, because that gives you something as well. But one could argue that if you're going through angst, well-heeled angst is very nice. Yes, and to a certain extent that's true, but it's angst nonetheless, especially if you feel that you've been betrayed. And Ivan Novello and Stephen Tennant betray him. They just do. And his one great love is never consummated. With Wilfred Owen, it remains pure. But you've got to look at things truthfully, I think, and not sugar a pill. It's easy to be sentimental. It's very easy to be sentimental. And certainly where color is concerned, because color can prettify things. And you can use color to drain every kind of sympathy. I mean, the colors that they chose, that Andy Harris chose for the Tribunal, I mean, are just wonderful. Those dark greens and browns. I mean, airless, humorless, without any kind of humanity. Bare windows as well, which I've always found incredibly depressing, bare windows. So it's all those things which contribute to what you're looking at. But again, I can trace that back emotionally, if not intellectually, to a couple of the first scenes in Young at Heart when Doris Day goes back upstairs with her elder sister, and it's the most wonderful soft yellows and blues and whites, exquisitely soft. And thinking, oh, wouldn't it be lovely to be in a room like that?
Absolutely true. But there's another part of the texture of the film that is very special, and it's the use of archive footage of real soldiers in World War One. And there are certain scenes that people know of World War One because they're used everywhere, but this felt incredibly fresh, and something about the way you used movement within the use of archive, it felt like it was part of the sweep of the narrative. And I'm curious as to how you did that.
Well, I knew one practical thing. The money we could raise, we couldn't do the trenches. I mean, you just can't reproduce the trenches. And in fact, if you've got unlimited amount of money, you still can't produce what it was like. Because when you see that footage, that's real. It's not phony, it's real people being killed. It's a cameraman with a huge old-fashioned camera, which was hand-cranked into battle. That archive footage is barbaric, it's beautiful, and it's incredibly moving. And I always knew that I wanted to do that. But certain practical things are part of it too. You must make sure that the British are always going left to right and the Germans right to left, because otherwise you get confused.
That's an interesting one. And of course, another trademark of the Terence Davies we know and love is the use of music. And it's particularly rich, your use of music, alongside poetry, of course. But could you talk a little bit about some of your musical choices? I'm thinking particularly of Riders of the Sky, Riders in the Sky, I think.
Well, one of my, we always had a do on a Saturday. Nearly every Saturday, well, we always had a do, and people would come. And one of my mother's neighbours was called Mrs. Doran, and she was married to a man called Mr. Doran, who drove Guinness vans. And he was a lovely gentleman, and I thought incredibly handsome. I remember his two children were my age. I think, oh, imagine having a father that's that lovely and the handsome. He was such a lovely man. Occasionally he would come in and to take Mrs. Doran home, and he would always have a bottle of pale ale, and he would sing Ghost Riders in the Sky. That's where I remember it from. God knows where it came from, out of my subconscious. But the irony is, the man who wrote it and who actually sang it, that's the 1948 version, it's about redemption. I didn't know that at the time, but that's what it's about. And also the subtext is, cannon fodder. These soldiers are being treated like cattle. So that's where that came from. The Vaughan Williams I've always loved. I mean, I've always loved the Talis Fantasia. It's one of the great works for string orchestra, written by anyone, anywhere. And when it was unveiled in 1910 at Gloucester, it had a lukewarm reception. You can hardly believe it now. I never had any idea in other films, but I thought, one day I'm going to use that. And then when I was writing the script, I thought, it's got to come at the end. After we hear Disabled, that's where it's got to come. It's a wonderful, wonderful piece. But music has to be felt. It would tell you. It will just tell you when it's right. I don't know how but it does. You think, no, it's, or you've chosen a piece of music. I think, actually, it's better down there, 5 minutes down the film. Not where it is in the script, because once it's shot, I never looked at the script again. The film's got to be alive, and the images have got to work. But it's always somehow, when I'm writing the script, there's a sort of antennae out for music. I can't tell you why, but every single time I've made a film and a particular piece of music I've used, suddenly it gets played all the time. After making Deep Blue Sea, I've forgotten the number of performances of the Barbara Howling concerto that I heard. It's quite extraordinary. The other 2 days ago, they were doing a thing on Radio 3 about folk song. What comes up? The Talis Fantasia. It's extraordinary.
I mean, it is an incredibly emotional rendition at the very end of the film, that it really just, it's a great pause that you kind of the enormity of what has happened. The two Siegfried Sassoons that we've seen. Maybe we should talk a little bit about relationships within the film, because Siegfried gets about a bit. He has relationships with different people of different sorts, and in his unconsummated love affair with Wilfred Owen, but there's a closeness that we see in the dancing when they're doing the show at Craig Lockhart, and then they choreograph each other in the swimming pool, which is very interesting what you were saying about swimming pools and erotic desire early on. But then other relationships are not quite so warm, and there's a gasp-inducing harshness and viciousness and brutality that you don't shy away from. And actually, it really put me off Ivan Novello. I thought he was just a really nice young man who sang beautifully, but he doesn't seem to. There does seem to be a kind of treating people in a very disposable way.
Yes, I mean,
and even you look at pictures or portraits of someone like Stephen Tennant, and you think, "Oh, as a superficial gay man, I'm deeply attracted to you. Seem like a beautiful person." But what your film beautifully shows is that beauty is not always inside. That there's beautiful people, and there's people who are genuinely loving and warm, and just the emotional kind of arrows that are thrown at poor old Siegfried and people like Glenn Byam Shaw. I'd only really come across him in a portrait by Glyn Philpott, who I think actually painted Siegfried Sassoon as well. And it's a wonderful kind of conjunction or compare and contrast to that. I know there's an exhibition going on at Pallant House in Winchester that I think anyone who sees this film would really enjoy seeing, that kind of gay art from the period put out there. So there's a kind of cultural zeitgeist of people being just brought back into the frame. But in casting Ivan Novello and Glenn and Stephen Tennant, were you going for a particular look?
No. When you audition people, if they can do it, you can tell, regardless of whether they look like the person they're playing or not. That doesn't play a part in it at all. It's if I think that they can do the role. I mean, where Ivan Novello is concerned, I mean, even in his official biography, they say, oh, well, these peccadillos weren't really important because he had this long-term partner. And you think, actually, that's not the case. The three years that he had the affair with Siegfried Sassoon destroyed his own diaries. It was that bad. You could argue that Stephen Tennant is even worse. He's a complete narcissist. They are only concerned about themselves, And at least where Stephen Tennant is concerned, he actually exacts some sort of revenge at the very end. And revenge is, not only a dish best tasted cold, it's also unsatisfying too, even though for once he wants to inflict some damage. I'm very lonely now. He says, I'm very lonely. He says, and Siegfried says, is it agony? One does hope so.
I mean, I think that's also fascinating, the time and the healing or not within having been savaged, that it's a very unusual emotional picture and part of the fascinating spread of things that are revealed in this tale of life and the search for redemption in its many forms. I think it's a wonderful education. Everyone should see this film. But we're now going to allow someone else to get a word in. We do have some questions, I'm reliably informed, from the worldwide audience.
We do. I'm very sorry to interrupt you. I want this to go on for hours and hours. So just for me. But thank you very much, everyone, for your questions. Just do post them up. So the first question is from Henry. Thanks very much, Henry. He says, I wanted to ask about Terence's writing process. When you are working on a script, how much are you thinking about the images at that point? Are they detailed plans for framing, movement, etc., or does that come later?
No, I write every shot that I see, so that when I go onto the set, I know every shot in the script. A, because I couldn't do it any other way, and B, it maximizes your assets. You know, if you think, well, in this particular scene, we have to cover the entire room. In this particular scene, we only have to do half of it or a corner of it, and that's where it helps very much to be as detailed as possible. But writing the images sort of writes themselves, because they tell you what they want. You can feel whether it should be a close-up or where to cut. It's only a guideline anyway, because when you get to the cutting room, it's completely different. But I write it as I see it and I hear it. That because I couldn't do it any other way, and that way it saves time on the day, you know, and you're not faffing about with a viewfinder saying, oh, where should I put the camera? Because I'm on small budgets and there isn't that luxury.
Thank you. Are there any contemporary filmmakers that you like, or contemporary films that you have liked?
Not really, because the sad thing about becoming a filmmaker is destroys the very thing you love. So I can't watch things with clear, innocent eyes. I just can't. I'm conscious of framing, of acting, of the music, that's not like an ordinary member of the audience. So in a sense, it's killed that part of me. What's lovely is when you see a film out of the blue that you really enjoy. And you always know in the first 2 minutes whether you're in good hands or not. You can just tell. You think, oh, they know what they're doing. I can relax now and not get het up. But no, it's very difficult now. Very, very difficult now. Because I can't see it with fresh eyes. I wish I could. I wish I could. Occasionally you do see something that thrills you. I saw a lovely little film many years ago. I've even forgotten the title, in Istanbul. A lovely little film about the relationship between a middle-aged man and his mother. And it was delightful, full of humor, full of humanity. And that was lovely to see that. And it was only a young lad who made it. He said, but I stole something from your film. And I said, what? He said, the music from House of Mirth. I said, well, it's much better to be stolen from than to steal. He was a lovely lad, lovely lad.
That's definitely true. Does Terence have a favourite of his work? I watched Madonna and Child for the first time recently and loved it. And they're saying, looking forward to seeing Benediction. So do you have a favourite of your own work? I guess that's a hard question, isn't it?
Not really. I like certain bits. I think that's rather good. And I can run that in my head, so I don't have to get the DVD down from my bookshelves. No, there are certain little bits that I think, oh, I think that really captured it. I like the other headshots at the end of Long Day Closes. You know, I think, oh, that was rather clever of me. But no, I don't have, because I don't watch them. You know, because you see them so often in post-production, you never ever want to see them again.
Oh, this is an interesting question from John, thank you. Does Terence ever revisit his old neighbourhood in Liverpool? And what thoughts does that bring in 2022? And he also asks, does he ever feel that he'd like to make an overtly political film?
Well, going back to Liverpool is very, very hard. I had to do with Of Time in the City, and then Mark Kermode did a piece, and we went back again. But I go back to a Liverpool that's gone. It's only in my mind now. It's part of history, and I find that very, very difficult. Or the other times I go back is my family dying, and that makes it even harder. But the Liverpool that I knew has disappeared. It's not there anymore. I find that hard. I find that very hard indeed. but politically, no, I couldn't possibly make a political film because I'm too emotional about it. I've been socialist all my life, but I just wish the party could get itself together and do something positive and get this awful crucial out that we've got. I'm too emotional. You've got to be much more sanguine about doing a political film. Because in the early days, in fact, one person said about Long Day Closes, there's nothing political in it. I said, well, no, there isn't. The only thing that could be conceived as political was one night, this black man came into the house by accident. It was a mistake. I was frightened because I ran into someone I didn't know, and because you didn't go to the areas which were people were. The black people were like up upon the street, and that was a long way away. You didn't go out of your comfort zone, if you like. But I've never been political. I mean, I'm too naive. I'm too emotional, and that's not good for someone who's trying to suggest a better way forward politically.
Do you have any films that have got away? So, are there films? Do you have films that you wanted to make and you haven't been able to, or stories that you wanted to tell and you haven't been able to?
Yes, there are two. We just couldn't get the money at all to found it. At the moment, I'm hoping to raise the money on a film based on a Stefan Zweig novel called The Post Office Girl. But you're in the independent sector. I'm not a director whose films make vast amounts of money and all that, and use big names. That makes it difficult for the way in which the films I make and the way in which I make them. That makes it hard to raise money. It always has been that way. There's nothing you can do about that. But you do get fed up having to compete with something that costs $50 million to make. How can you compete with that? Well, actually, you can't. You just remain in the shallows, swimming around with the other smaller fry.
This is somebody's asked in response to that. Do you think it's harder to get films made now compared to when you started?
Yes, I think it is. Yes, I do think it is. It's much more like an industry now. And because it costs a lot of money, and the only other art form that costs more is opera. But who can afford 150 quid for a seat at Covent Garden? I mean, I can't. But it's becoming more and more difficult. I don't know how young people get films off the ground. I simply don't know how they do it. They've got to have enormous resolve, enormous strength, and constant persistence. But it's not easy.
Oh, this is an interesting thing. How do you feel your craft has developed over the times that you've made films? So I guess what do you see? What are the things that you have learned as you've been making films?
Well, you learn the craft of it, but you learn something that's much more vague. You learn about the nature of how much you leave in and what you take out. The old cliche of more is less and less is more. Sometimes less is less, sometimes more is more, and it's a very difficult line to tread, and that's always difficult once you get into the cutting room. But I think I'm a lot more at ease than I was. I'm a terrible worrier. And the last film, apart from the COVID, which thank God the BFI and BBC came up with the extra cash, I'm a great worrier. And this is the one film where I wasn't constantly worried all the time, even though I should have been about COVID. I wasn't. I feel different about this film and the way in which I did it. And I can't tell you why. I mean, I think those 8 years when I didn't make anything at all, that was where I started to change. And again, I don't know what the change is. I can't quantify it, but I know I'm not the same.
Did you enjoy this one more then, do you feel?
Oh, yes, this is the most enjoyable film I've ever made. I think it's my best. I'm very proud of it, because everyone from the very top down to the smallest cog in the machine gave it enormous support. And it literally, I don't see it as my film anymore. I see it as ours.
Oh, that's lovely. Sorry, I've just got time for one more. Sorry, Brian, I'm asking all the questions. Well, everyone else is asking all the questions. Sorry. Someone said, I think the Terence Davies trilogy is possibly your only films made in the present. Do you have a preference of working with the past, and do you think you'll make something set in the present day again?
Probably not, because I don't understand the modern world. I'm a technophobe. I can't use anything. If it weren't for my John and my manager and my friend next door, I wouldn't be able to do any of this. And I don't understand the modern world because I don't understand this technology. I'm also frightened of it as well, and I'm repelled by the narcissism of present culture. That I don't like at all. We all seem to think that we're the center of the world, and we're not. We're just not. I don't like that either. Whether I'd make anything in the present, I really don't know. I shouldn't think so somehow. Who knows though? You never know. I might get Fast and Furious 29 offered me. I might not be able to turn it down. But if I did, it would go very, very slowly. Very, very slowly. I'd make them pay for all that violence.
Maybe I'll just do one.
I'd see that.
Do one last one. Say, would you ever consider doing an opera or a musical?
I'd love to do a musical. Wasn't able to. I wanted to do Follies, and for reasons I won't go into, we couldn't do it. I've been. People have said, "Why don't you do opera?" But I've never been asked. And opera is a part of the classical world which I have to be in the mood for. I was asked once to do a Baroque opera. I sat through the rehearsal, which lasted 4 hours. I had no idea what was going on. I had no idea who was who. And someone halfway through began to be another person as well. I was completely confused, incomprehensible. It was, I could feel this kind of creeping paralysis. Well, that's not an inducement.
I want you to make a musical. That would be amazing.
Oh,
make a musical. That's what we'll take away from tonight.
Okay.
The Fast and the Furious 29 is a musical film. There's been such a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much, both of you, Terence and Brian. It's just been wonderful. I want you to come back now. I want you to come back tomorrow. If you're both available, book you in.
Thank you.
Thank you very much to everybody for joining us this evening. And once again, thank you, Terence Davies, Brian Robinson. It's been an absolute privilege and to hear you speak. And
thank you. Thanks, Brian, very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Terence.